The first time I saw her, she was standing in her driveway, one hand resting on a stack of moving boxes, the other brushing a loose strand of black hair from her cheek. The late afternoon sun caught the faint shine in her dark eyes, the kind that carried both confidence and a quiet tiredness, like she had seen too much and learned to carry it with grace. She was my new neighbor, 40, maybe 41, though the way she moved made time feel irrelevant, steady, sure, effortlessly composed. There was a calm around her that didn't need words to be felt. I remember thinking she looked like she belonged in a different kind of life, one with wine-stained sunsets, not dusty sidewalks and chipped fences like ours. I offered to help with the boxes. She smiled, slow, knowing, the kind of smile that didn't quite reach her eyes at first. "That's sweet," she said, her voice low and warm, the kind that wraps around you before you realize you're sinking into it. "But these are lighter than they look." Of course, I didn't listen. I carried them anyway. Her living room smelled faintly of vanilla candles and old books, like the past had followed her inside. She guided me where to place each box, never hurried, never flustered. There was a ring mark on her finger, pale against her tan skin. It told its own story, one she didn't seem eager to share. Between trips, she asked the usual questions: how long I'd lived here, what I did, if I liked the neighborhood. But there was something in the way she looked at me when I spoke. Not flirty, not maternal, just curious, as if she was quietly measuring the spaces between my words. At one point, I caught her gazing out the window, her lips parted slightly as though caught in a thought. When she turned back, the sunlight had shifted, brushing over her face like a gentle touch. That's when I noticed the small laugh lines near her eyes, traces of a woman who had lived fully, even if not always happily. When I was about to leave, she stopped me. "You're kind," she said softly, leaning against the doorframe. "Not many people are these days." Her tone wasn't casual. It was almost tender, like she hadn't said something kind in a long while. I didn't know what to say back, so I just smiled. That's when she tilted her head slightly, her gaze holding mine a second longer than it should have. "You should be careful being this nice," she added with a faint smirk. "Someone might take advantage of it." It sounded like a tease, but there was a warning buried in her tone, a glimmer of truth wrapped in playfulness. I didn't understand it then. I only remember the way her eyes lingered on me, soft but unreadable, as I stepped back across the lawn. That night, her light stayed on long past midnight. It started with coffee. The next morning, she waved at me from her porch, mug in hand, robe loosely tied, her hair still damp from a shower. The air was crisp, touched with the scent of wet grass, and she looked almost out of place against the quiet suburban calm. Too poised, too vivid. I was on my way out for a morning run, but she called out, "Hey, coffee's fresh if you've got a minute." I didn't, but somehow I did. Her kitchen felt warm, lived in, and unmistakably hers. Soft jazz played low from a speaker on the counter, and sunlight filtered through the sheer curtains, tracing golden patterns across the floor. She poured me a cup, black, then added a touch of milk without asking. Somehow, she already knew. She leaned against the counter, watching me with that same half-smile that never gave away too much. "You look like someone who's still figuring himself out," she said lightly, stirring her coffee. "That's not an insult, just an observation." Her tone was teasing, but her eyes, dark brown and steady, carried an understanding I couldn't quite place. I laughed it off, but inside, something about her presence pulled at me. There was no rush in the way she spoke, no need to fill silences. The pauses between her words were just as full as her sentences. We talked about small things, books, neighbors, the quietness of the town. She told me she used to live in the city, said she missed the noise sometimes, but not the people. When I asked why she moved, her gaze flickered toward the window again. "Sometimes life asks you to start over," she said, her voice soft but edged with memory. "And you either do it or you drown." The room went quiet for a moment. Even the music seemed to hush. I could sense there was more she wasn't saying, a story that lived behind her calm. But I didn't push. Somehow I didn't need to. The silence said enough. After a while, she laughed gently, shaking her head as if catching herself being too serious. You don't have to listen to my rambling, she said. I'm not used to company yet. I smiled. I don't mind. She looked at me then, really looked like she was seeing something in me that reminded her of someone else, or maybe of a younger version of herself. The look lasted only a second, but it stayed with me long after I left. As I reached the door, she spoke again, voice playful now, but her eyes unreadable. You're a sweet boy, she said, setting her mug down. Just be careful, okay? Sweet boys have a way of making women remember things they shouldn't. Her words lingered in my chest as I stepped out into the morning light. The warmth of her kitchen fading, but her voice still echoing like a melody I wasn't supposed to hear twice. That was the moment I knew she wasn't just a neighbor anymore. Something had shifted quietly between the sound of coffee cups and her careful smile. It rained for 3 days straight after that morning coffee. The kind of rain that makes everything smell like wet earth and forgotten memories. The neighborhood went quiet, just the hiss of water against rooftops and the occasional rumble of thunder in the distance. On the second evening, I saw her struggling with the gutter. She stood on a small ladder, one hand gripping the edge, the other trying to clear the clog with a broom handle. Her hair was damp, sticking to her cheeks, and she wore a gray sweater that clung a little too close. I hesitated for a moment, part of me wondering if she'd even want help, but something about the way she sighed, soft and defeated, made it impossible to walk past. You're gonna hurt yourself, I called out, stepping closer under my umbrella. She looked down at me, strands of wet black hair framing her face. You again, she said, half laughing. What is it with you and saving women who don't need saving? Maybe I just like pretending I'm useful, I said, smiling. Her laugh came light this time, genuine. She let me hold the ladder while she climbed down, shaking her head. Raindrops slid from her hair to her collarbone. She wiped her cheek with the back of her hand and sighed. Guess I'm not as capable as I used to be, she murmured. You're doing fine, I said, softer than I meant to. For a second, she just looked at me, the rain between us like a curtain. Her eyes softened, and I felt it again, that unspoken something pulling tight in the air. Then, as if to break it, she reached for the broom. Come on, she said, let's finish this before we drown. We worked together in the rain, passing tools, brushing off leaves, laughing at how pointless it all was when the sky refused to stop pouring. Her sleeve brushed my arm once, light, accidental, but it left a warmth that no amount of rain could wash away. When the job was done, she insisted I come inside. Her house felt cozier than before, the scent of rain mixing with candle wax and faint traces of vanilla. She handed me a towel, then disappeared into the kitchen, returning with 2 mugs of tea. We sat near the window, watching the rain chase itself down the glass. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then she said quietly, It's strange. I used to hate the sound of rain. It reminded me of arguments I couldn't stop. I turned to her, but she kept her gaze outside, her voice almost lost in the rhythm of the storm. Now, she continued, it just feels quiet, like I finally survived it. I didn't know what to say. I only reached for the mug she handed me, our fingers brushing. Just once, just enough. Her breath caught, barely noticeable, but I felt it. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was charged, familiar, dangerous. Outside, the storm eased into a drizzle. Inside, something else began to stir, slow, uncertain, but undeniably alive. It happened on a quiet Friday evening, the kind that hums softly between loneliness and comfort. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the air smelling of damp soil and jasmine from her garden. I was sitting on my porch, pretending to read, when I heard her voice. Hey, she called across the fence. Got a minute? She was standing there in a loose white blouse and faded jeans, barefoot on the wet pavement. The porch light behind her framed her in gold, softening the sharp edges of her confidence. She held a bottle of wine and 2 glasses, her smile carrying that same quiet daring I'd started to recognize. I need help opening this, she said, though I could tell she didn't really. Inside her home, the lights were low, the space filled with that same calm warmth I'd grown to crave. There was soft music playing again, something old and slow, and she poured the wine carefully, as if the act itself meant something. I sat opposite her at the dining table, trying not to seem as nervous as I felt. "To surviving the week," she said, raising her glass. "To surviving," I echoed, and we drank. The wine loosened her smile, softened her shoulders. We talked about everything and nothing. Her old house in Seattle, my useless job, the strange comfort of starting over in quiet places. She laughed at my jokes, even the bad ones, and once, when I said something that reminded her of her past, she went silent for a long moment. Then she said, "You know, it's strange being alone after so long. You start to forget what it's like to be looked at." Her words hung in the air, heavy but honest. She wasn't fishing for comfort. She was just telling the truth. "I don't think anyone could forget to look at you," I said quietly, before I could stop myself. She froze, not offended, just surprised, then looked down, tracing her finger around the rim of her glass. "Careful," she murmured. "That sounds dangerously close to flattery." "Maybe it is." Her laugh was quiet, but it trembled slightly, not from amusement, but from the weight of something neither of us wanted to name. A small silence followed. She reached across the table, resting her hand near mine, not touching, just close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from her skin. "You're a kind soul," she said softly. "Too kind for the world, maybe." For the first time, she didn't look like the confident woman next door. She looked real, human, a little broken, and somehow stronger because of it. We sat there for what felt like forever, the air between us alive with something unspoken. When she finally stood, she placed her empty glass in the sink and said, "You should probably head home before I start saying things I shouldn't." I wanted to ask what she meant, but I didn't. I just watched as she smiled faintly, that same knowing smile she'd worn the day we met, and whispered, almost to herself, "Careful, boy. You make it too easy to remember what warmth feels like." That night, I didn't sleep. Her voice replayed in my head, soft and dangerous like a secret I wasn't supposed to want. The next few days passed in quiet rhythm. Polite hellos, soft smiles from across the fence, brief waves at sunset. But there was a new tension threaded between us now, subtle but impossible to ignore. It lived in every glance that lingered a beat too long, in every sentence that trailed off when our eyes met. Then came the day her car wouldn't start. I found her in the driveway, hood up, frustration written across her face. She wore a light blue shirt, sleeves rolled up, a streak of oil on her wrist. The sight of her, graceful even in irritation, pulled a grin out of me before I could help it. "Need a hand?" I asked. She turned, brushing her hair back with the back of her wrist. "I was hoping you'd say that," she said with a mock sigh. "I've been out here wrestling with this thing for half an hour." We leaned over the engine together. The afternoon sun was bright, scattering through the trees, glinting off the chrome and her dark hair. I explained what I thought the issue was, and she watched me closely, amused. "You actually sound like you know what you're doing," she teased. "Only because I'm pretending," I admitted. That made her laugh, really laugh. The sound low and warm, like sunlight turned into sound. She leaned closer, still smiling, and said quietly, different from the people I used to know. There was something wistful in her tone. I wanted to ask what she meant, but her gaze caught mine before I could. The air shifted, thickened. For a moment, neither of us looked away. The scent of engine oil and jasmine filled the small space between us. Then she took a breath, stepped back slightly, and said, "You make it too easy to forget the rules." Before I could respond, a neighbor called out from across the street, waving. She smiled politely, waved back, and the moment dissolved like fog in sunlight. But the rest of the afternoon carried that electricity, that unspoken awareness, between us. We eventually got the car running. She thanked me with a gentle touch on my arm, her fingers warm and lingering just long enough to make my pulse skip. "You're full of surprises," she said softly. That evening, as I sat in my room, I caught myself replaying the look in her eyes, that mix of admiration and restraint, curiosity and warning. I realized then that something fragile but undeniable was forming between us. Later, I saw her through the window, sitting on her porch with a glass of wine, staring into the fading sky. When our eyes met across the distance, she didn't look away this time. Instead, she lifted her glass slightly in a silent toast. I did the same, heart beating faster than it should have. That was the moment it became real, the shift from simple, neighborly warmth to something deeper, riskier. We hadn't spoken words, but we both knew. Whatever this was, it had already begun. It was one of those late summer nights when the air feels too still, too heavy, like even the wind is holding its breath. I was sitting outside, scrolling idly through my phone, when I saw her lights still on across the yard. Every window glowed, soft gold against the darkness. Then, her front door opened. She stepped out wrapped in a light cardigan, her hair loose, falling in gentle waves over her shoulders. She looked up at the stars for a long moment before noticing me. A small smile curved her lips. "Can't sleep either?" I shook my head. "Guess the night's too loud to ignore." She laughed under her breath, the sound soft and low. "Come over," she said. I made tea. Could use the company. Her living room was dim but warm. A single lamp lit the space, casting a golden haze on the cream walls. She poured 2 cups of chamomile, her hands steady though her expression was distant, thoughtful. "It's strange," she said, settling on the couch beside me. "For years, I hated silence. Now, it's the only thing that makes sense." I turned toward her, but she kept her gaze fixed on her cup. The room smelled faintly of citrus and candle wax. She wore no makeup tonight, and up close, I could see the faint shadows under her eyes, the kind that don't come from lack of sleep, but from carrying too much for too long. "You ever feel like you spent half your life pretending to be fine?" she asked suddenly. Her voice cracked slightly, the first sign of vulnerability she'd ever let slip. I hesitated, then said quietly, "Maybe that's why it feels strange when someone finally asks if you're okay." She looked at me, then really looked, and something shifted in her eyes. There was gratitude there, but also fear. "You shouldn't look at me like that," she whispered. "Like what?" "Like you see something worth saving." The silence after that was deafening. I could hear her breathing, steady but uneven. She reached for the remote, turned the music on, something slow, old, and heartbreakingly gentle. And then she did something unexpected. She leaned back, closing her eyes, and said, "Dance with me." I almost laughed, but the tone in her voice stopped me. It wasn't playful. It was tender, yearning. So I stood, hesitantly. She followed, stepping close, close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating off her skin. Her hand found mine, fingers curling lightly, her other resting just above my chest. We moved slowly, barely swaying, the kind of dance that wasn't really about dancing. Her head brushed my shoulder, and for a brief moment, the world disappeared, just breath, touch, and the faint hum of music between us. Then she whispered, "If I were 10 years younger," and stopped herself. I waited, but she didn't finish. She just smiled sadly, stepped back, and said, "It's late. You should go before I say something we'll both remember." But as I left, her voice followed me softly through the open door. "Good night, sweetheart." That was the night I knew she felt it too. She just wasn't ready to admit it. The morning after that night, the world felt quieter, like the air itself was holding on to what had been left unsaid. The sky was pale gold, dew clinging to every blade of grass, and her house looked almost unreal in that soft light. I told myself not to go over, to give her space, to pretend last night hadn't happened. But then I saw her. She was sitting on her porch steps, still in her cardigan, barefoot, a cup of coffee cupped between her hands. Her hair was slightly tousled, her expression peaceful, but her eyes, those dark, steady eyes, told a different story. She looked up when she saw me, and for a second, the tension that had lived between us for weeks melted into something quieter. "Morning," she said softly. "You're up early." "I couldn't sleep," I admitted. She smiled faintly, patting the space beside her. "Then sit. No point fighting it." So I did. The wooden steps were cool beneath us, the scent of coffee and wet grass wrapping the silence like a blanket. We didn't speak for a while. We didn't need to. Every word we hadn't said the night before seemed to hang there, gentle, waiting. Finally, she exhaled and said, I kept thinking about last night. I looked at her, heart caught somewhere between hope and hesitation. She kept her gaze fixed ahead on the quiet street. I didn't mean to make things complicated, she murmured. You're young, and she trailed off, shaking her head lightly. I've already made enough mistakes trying to fix what's broken. Maybe this isn't a mistake, I said before I could stop myself. She turned then, slowly, and for the first time didn't look away. Her expression softened, her lips parting as though to argue, but no words came. The morning light traced the faint lines at the corners of her eyes, the small signs of a life that had been lived, fought for, and quietly rebuilt. She placed her coffee down beside her and whispered, "You don't understand how easy it is for me to want to feel again." "I think I do," I said quietly. "You make me feel like it's okay to care, even if it hurts." Her breath caught. Then, slowly, she reached over and took my hand. The simplest gesture, but it felt like the world tilted when she did. Her fingers were warm, steady, her thumb brushing lightly over my knuckles as if she was memorizing the shape of the moment. "I don't know where this goes," she said softly, "but I like how it feels right now." I smiled. "Then that's enough." The wind moved through the trees, scattering sunlight across her porch. For the first time, she let her head rest lightly against my shoulder, just for a moment, just long enough for me to feel the quiet rhythm of her breath against my arm. We didn't kiss. We didn't need to. The silence said everything about longing, restraint, and the strange, tender peace of finally being seen. And when she whispered, almost to herself, "Careful, boy. I might just steal your firsts," I didn't look away this time. I just smiled because she already had.